We did discuss this choice for the Fed chair, Kevin Warsh. Now let's bring in our senior economics reporter, Steve Leisman, along with former Fed Vice Chairman Roger Ferguson for more. Mr. Ferguson, it's great to see you. Steve, always good to have you. Roger, you first. What is your reaction to the Warsh pick?
First, I would say not surprised. Many people expected that to be the outcome. Secondly, I think now, in some sense for him, the hard work begins. He's got to get through a Senate hearing, which should be smooth, but it's against the backdrop of a lot of politics. More importantly, once he's in the seat, he's got to continue the process of figuring out this very unusual economy and, very importantly, trying to get a consensus built out of a Fed that right now is really quite divided. And finally, and most importantly, doing all of that while reassuring the markets that he is an independent actor. So, good choice. And now I'd say the harder part begins.
Okay, Steve, a lot is being made, obviously, of Mr. Warsh's views, not only of the Fed itself over the years, but his calls on inflation that didn't come to fruition at a time when the labor market was softening. I thought it was interesting. I saw from Renaissance Macro, now they're frequent guests on our program, and they put on social media, quote, Kevin Warsh has been a monetary policy hawk his entire career. And most importantly, during a time when the labor markets fell out of bed, his dovishness today stems from convenience. The president risks getting duped. I read that because I want to ask you, does Warsh need to run from his past? Can he? Is there anything to emerge from?
I think Roger sort of said it. I'm going to say it a little differently, which is what Warsh needs to do is leave his dogma at the door. And I think that's really the key. He is a member of the Hoover Institute, and I went out to their annual gatherings every year, and every one of them, every time, there he is. I think that maybe at the Hoover Institute, I don't know, but they're all, no matter where the Fed was, it wasn't tight enough. If the Fed was easy, it should have been tighter. If the Fed was tight, it should have been tighter still. And so now this idea that Kevin is going to be something of a dove relative to the president's policies, I guess he'll give it a go. But I'm fairly confident, Scott, that if it doesn't work out, he would turn tail pretty quickly and start to raise interest rates in order to combat inflation that was not under control. And it's interesting to think about whether or not the market will test him. The market somehow finds a way, I don't know if it's ever consciously or not, to test every Fed chair. And the test is this. Are you willing to give up the economy and economic growth in order to control inflation? It's the ultimate test that the bond market wants to know. And I think Kevin is up to that job, but he may have to leave some of the dogma at the door.
I mean, Roger, these were points of advocacy in many respects. He wasn't the Fed chair. Of course, he's a former Fed governor. One can learn from their so-called mistakes, though, can they not? Jay Powell has admittedly made mistakes around transitory and some other things, keeping policy too loose for too long. A central banker is capable of learning and adopting and adjusting.
No, absolutely. Central bankers, I hate to break it to you, are only human. And so, yes, they will learn from their mistakes. More importantly, central bankers have two other traits that are very important. One is learning from history. And so, in the central bank community, Arthur Burns demonized, Paul Volcker deified. Everyone wants to be on the Paul Volcker side. And most importantly, I think there's now, broadly speaking, an understanding that inflation is a really pernicious tax on everyone. And so, creating and maintaining inflation-fighting credibility will be extremely important. The final point I'd make is the past is the past. Once you become the chair of the FOMC and the chair of the Board of Governors, the degree of responsibility changes quite dramatically. You're not one of seven, you're the leader. And any commitments you may have made to anyone at all also go out the window. And so I think, it will be a new day once he gets through, and then we'll watch him. And he will be tested to prove that he's got the ability to be more like Paul Volcker, if that's what's called for, or Ben Bernanke, if that's what's called for, but certainly not Arthur Burns.